I had always believed that love was a fortress, a sanctuary built on trust and shared dreams. In the quiet suburban calm of our life, my wife, Ainsley, and I had forged what I thought was an unbreakable bond. Every morning, as the soft light crept through the curtains and the gentle hum of the city stirred awake around us, I felt secure in the warmth of our love. Yet that Valentine's Day morning, a single repulsive discovery shattered the illusion. As I rose from our king-sized bed, I noticed something out of place beneath it. There, half concealed in the dim light, lay a used condom. At first, I blinked in disbelief. Surely it was a prank or a cruel misunderstanding. My mind raced with questions. Who could have left such a thing in our private space? And why here, on a day that was supposed to celebrate our love? When I confronted Ainsley later that day, her eyes filled with a mix of fear and resignation. In a voice barely above a whisper, she admitted that the object was the gift of our cleaning lady, Sable, a woman who, according to her, had been involved in a fleeting dalliance with her. Ainsley claimed it was a meaningless indulgence, a misguided flirtation meant only to awaken a long-dormant part of her. But the tone of her confession, laced with guilt and half-truths, did little to soothe the rising tide of anger and disbelief inside me. I stood in the kitchen, the clink of porcelain and the murmur of an ordinary day contrasting sharply with the turmoil in my heart. Every detail of that morning replayed in my mind. The coldness of that stray remnant, the trembling in Ainsley's voice, and the unspoken admission in her eyes. I knew then that something was terribly amiss. This was not a one-time lapse. It was the opening crack in a dam that would soon burst forth with damning evidence. Refusing to let my suspicions fester unchallenged, I resolved to uncover the truth. I wasn't a man who would quietly suffer betrayal. I needed certainty. That night, after a long, sleepless vigil, I set about installing a discreet camera in our bedroom, a hidden lens that would bear witness to the intimate hours of our life while we slept, and, I hoped, expose the truth behind Ainsley's furtive behavior. Lying in bed that night, I forced myself to sleep despite the storm raging inside me. The soft beeping of the alarm clock and the comforting rustle of the sheets belied the chaos that had been set in motion. I lay awake, pondering the possible implications of Ainsley's confession. Had our love truly been a sham all along? Was the tender woman I adored a stranger, capable of engaging with other lovers behind my back? These questions gnawed at me as the hours passed, each minute a painful reminder that the life I had trusted was built on a foundation of lies. I in the silent, watchful darkness. I recalled the promises we had made, to be honest, faithful, and true. Yet here I was, forced to confront the possibility that those promises were nothing but hollow words. My mind, once a haven of rationality and calm, was now clouded with one searing thought. I would know the truth, and I would not allow myself to be a victim any longer. The first rays of dawn found me still awake, the hidden camera silently recording as I sat on the edge of our unmade bed, steeling myself for what the next days might reveal. I resolved then that no matter how painful the truth might be, I would face it head-on. I would watch, learn, and ultimately decide the fate of the woman I once loved, and the betrayal that had been foisted upon me on that fateful Valentine's Day. Thus began a descent into a labyrinth of secrets, a journey from the innocent hope of love to the dark corridors of betrayal. Every minute that passed, every shadow cast by our bedroom's dim light, whispered of hidden transgressions waiting to be unveiled. And as I closed my eyes that morning, I felt only one certainty. My life, as I knew it, would never be the same again. Night after night, I returned to our bedroom with a heavy heart and a singular purpose, to watch. The hidden camera, concealed behind a framed painting on the wall, became my silent confidant, recording every moment that transpired within the sanctum of our marital bed. I pored over the footage with a mix of dread and morbid curiosity, each new clip a piece in the puzzle of my crumbling life. At first, I was met with images that left me numb. Ainsley, the woman I thought I knew, appeared on screen with a softness that belied the secret she harbored. But then, as the days slipped by, the recordings began to unveil a truth far more disturbing than I could have imagined. One by one, strangers arrived at our door, women with unfamiliar faces whose fleeting smiles and whispered caresses were captured in intimate detail against the backdrop of our once sacred bed. It wasn't long before the regularity of these encounters became undeniable. Each night, a new visitor would join Ainsley, their presence as casual as if they were old friends. I found myself compiling notes, correlating dates and times, and even trying to decipher the hidden language of her expressions. A language that now spoke only of betrayal. My heart, a maelstrom of anguish and rage, pounded as the evidence accumulated. It wasn't just a one-off indiscretion. It was a systematic dismantling of the life we had built together. Yet amid the sea of illicit encounters, one particular night seared itself into my memory. The footage from that evening was unlike any other. Ainsley was not alone. In addition to a young woman whose identity remained a blur in the dim light, the cleaning lady, Sable, made an appearance. But what caught my attention was not merely her presence. It was the fact that she was accompanied by another man. The scene that unfolded on our bed that night was one of raw, unfiltered passion shared by three individuals. It was a tableau of debauchery that left no room for denial. I replayed the scene over and over, each viewing deepening my sense of betrayal. The expressions on their faces, the intimacy shared between them. All of it was captured in excruciating detail. I wondered how many times this had happened before my discovery. Had I been living a lie for months? Even years? The certainty of the evidence was like a blade twisting in my chest. Each cut a reminder that my trust had been so brutally betrayed that in the days that followed, my nights were consumed by the silent testimony of the hidden lens. I began to notice subtleties. A fleeting touch, a lingering look, that spoke of an emotional intimacy as much as a physical one. The woman beside Ainsley changed frequently, yet her secret remained constant. I even recognized the soft laugh of Sable as she entered the frame on several occasions. It was a laugh that, once a symbol of domestic routine, now resonated with a cruel irony that I recall one particular clip vividly. Ainsley, dressed in the silken comfort of sleepwear, meeting a visitor at the threshold of our room. Their embrace was tender at first, then devolved into something more desperate, more consuming. As they sank into the mattress, the camera captured every fleeting moment, every whispered confession of pleasure. And in the background, as if on cue, the door creaked open, a silent herald of yet another intrusion into our shared sanctuary. That night, I watched as Sable, accompanied by her husband, Blaze, a man whose presence lent an air of dangerous collusion, joined the clandestine affair. The three of them entwined in a chaos of limbs and whispered promises formed a grotesque counterpoint to the love I once believed we shared. Each new revelation fanned the flames of a transformation within me. The initial shock and sorrow gave way to a cold, simmering anger, a resolve that grew stronger with every secret unveiled. I was no longer a passive husband betrayed by circumstance. I was a man awakened by the need for retribution. Yet even as I embraced this dark resolve, a part of me mourned the loss of the man I had once been. A man who had believed in forgiveness and the sanctity of love. With every playback, my determination hardened. I began to document every detail, every face, every gesture, assembling a dossier that was as damning as it was heartbreaking. I knew that the time would come when words alone would not suffice, that a physical reckoning was inevitable. And as I sat in the dim glow of the computer screen, the hidden footage casting ghostly images across my face, I vowed that the betrayal would not go unanswered. The camera had given me more than evidence. It had awakened in me a thirst for justice, a justice that would be as visceral and unyielding as the betrayal itself. No longer would I allow the deceit to remain hidden behind whispered lies and furtive glances. The truth, now undeniable, demanded a reckoning. One that I would soon orchestrate with a precision born of heartbreak and rage. I in that quiet, solitary vigil. As I watched the remnants of our life unravel on a digital canvas, I knew that the path ahead would be one of irrevocable change. I was preparing for a confrontation. A confrontation that would not be resolved by tears or quiet words, but by a force as raw and physical as the passion that had once bound us together. The seeds of retribution had been sown, and there was no turning back. In the silent aftermath of the revelations captured by the hidden lens, the shock of betrayal gradually gave way to a steely resolve. I began to plan, every detail meticulously considered, every possibility weighed against the need for decisive action. The evidence was irrefutable, and the time for passive suffering had ended. I was no longer Sterling, the man who believed in endless second chances. I had transformed into an avenger determined to reclaim my honor through physical retribution. The planning began in the dead of night, with blueprints of our once happy bedroom sprawled out on my desk alongside a growing collection of photographs, screenshots, and handwritten notes. I pored over the recordings, isolating the moments that had inflicted the deepest wounds. I analyzed Ainsley's schedule, noting the precise times when she was most vulnerable, and identified the patterns of the intrusions, the nights when the women came, and the rare but damning instances when Sable and her accomplice, Blaze, appeared. As I compiled my dossier, a cold clarity took hold. This wasn't merely a betrayal by a single individual, it was a systematic dismantling of my life by those I had trusted. I recalled the promises we'd made, the vows exchanged in a ceremony that had felt timeless. Now, those promises lay in ruins, trampled by the careless abandon of infidelity. My mind, once filled with memories of laughter and shared dreams, was now consumed by one unyielding thought. They must pay. In the weeks that followed, I embarked on a regimen of physical preparation. I enrolled in late-night self-defense classes and spent hours in the gym, each drop of sweat a testament to the mounting anger that fueled me. The training was not merely about building strength, it was a ritualistic transformation, a way to forge my body into a weapon capable of exacting the brutal justice I craved. Every punch thrown, every drop of exertion, was a rehearsal for the confrontation that I knew was inevitable. I began to study the art of combat with a fervor that bordered on obsession. I watched old films of martial artists, analyzed their techniques, and even practiced in the deserted corridors of our building after midnight. I learned to move silently, to harness the element of surprise, and to channel my emotions into a controlled fury. My mind, sharpened by the sting of betrayal, was now a machine of calculated vengeance. Yet, in the quiet moments between training sessions, doubts crept in like unwelcome phantoms. I found myself questioning the man I was becoming. Was this physical retribution truly justice? Or was it simply a descent into the same darkness that had corrupted the woman I once loved? But every time these doubts arose, I replayed the images from the hidden footage, the stolen moments of intimacy, the careless laughter of Sable, the cold, detached expression of Blaze, and my resolve would solidify. The betrayal was unforgivable, and the price of infidelity would be paid in full. I also began to map out the logistics of the planned confrontation. I knew that timing would be crucial. Ainsley's extramarital liaisons followed a predictable rhythm, a nocturnal dance that unfolded with a cruel regularity. I deduced that on certain nights, when the apartment was bathed in the soft glow of moonlight and the city's distant hum, the stage would be set for my final act. I marked these nights on a calendar, each one a potential opportunity to intercept the clandestine meetings. In parallel, I started to gather information on the identities of the visitors. Though their faces were blurred and their names unknown, subtle clues, snatches of conversation, distinctive mannerisms, began to form a mosaic of who they were. I visited local cafes, discreetly inquiring about women who might match the descriptions I had pieced together from the recordings. I learned that some were young and transient, while others had a more established presence in the city's underbelly of illicit affairs. It was clear, Ainsley's betrayal was not a solitary aberration, but a recurring pattern of deceit that extended far beyond a single lapse of judgment. As my plan crystallized, I resolved that my retribution would not be a mere verbal confrontation or a public shaming. No, this would be a physical reckoning, one where the guilty would feel the full weight of their treachery. I envisioned the confrontation in vivid detail. The oppressive silence of our bedroom, the sudden burst of violence as I emerged from the shadows, and the rapid, unyielding force of my attack. A storm of fists and raw power that would leave no doubt about the consequences of betrayal. Late one night, as I sat alone in our now ominous apartment, I rehearsed the scenario in my mind. I imagined the shock in Ainsley's eyes as I confronted her, the futile resistance of those who had shared in her betrayal, and the final, crushing blow that would mark the end of their false paradise. Every detail was etched into my consciousness: the positioning of furniture to serve as improvised cover, the escape routes I might need if things spiraled out of control, even the precise angle at which I would deliver my first strike. There was no room for hesitation. The planning was as much about the physical logistics as it was about the emotional finality. I was preparing not just to reclaim my honor, but to send a message that infidelity, no matter how carefully hidden or casually dismissed, would exact a price that could never be repaid. My training, my research, and every sleepless night spent in grim determination were converging on a single, inescapable truth. I would no longer be the passive victim of a crumbling love. I would be the executioner of betrayal, and so, as the days bled into nights and the calendar marked the inevitable approach of my moment of reckoning, I embraced the transformation with a heart as cold as steel. The man I had once been, tender, hopeful, and forgiving, was now replaced by a force forged in the crucible of betrayal. Every fiber of my being vibrated with the promise of retribution, and the stage was set for the confrontation that would change everything. The night was overcast, with a heavy drizzle that seemed to mute the city's usual clamor. A fitting backdrop for what was about to unfold. I had chosen this night deliberately, a time when the streets were shrouded in shadow and the unsuspecting world slumbered. I had learned from the recordings that Ainsley's secret trysts usually culminated in the early hours, when the apartment lay silent except for whispered lies and furtive caresses. Tonight, I would shatter that silence. I moved through the darkened corridors of our home with the silent precision of a predator. Every step was measured, every breath, a quiet promise of what was to come. The living room lay abandoned, the once warm, inviting space now transformed into an arena of retribution. I paused outside our bedroom door, heart pounding in time with the relentless patter of rain against the window. Inside, I could hear soft murmurs, indistinct at first, then growing more coherent as I pressed my ear to the cool wood. I waited until I was certain that the moment had arrived. The voices of Ainsley and her visitor, the latest in a long line of deceitful interlopers, filtered through the door. I recognized the tentative tone of seduction, the gentle, careless laughter that had become all too familiar over the past weeks. My hand tightened around the concealed weapon I had brought with me. A heavy, unyielding object that symbolized the culmination of my pain and fury. Without warning, I flung open the door. In that instant, the bedroom, bathed in the weak light of a bedside lamp, became a chaotic tableau. Ainsley, caught completely off guard, sat up with wide, terrified eyes. The visitor, a young woman whose face, even in dim light, registered shock and disbelief, scrambled to hide behind the covers. And in the far corner, almost as if emerging from a nightmare, Sable and Blaze had just stepped into the frame of our shared debauchery. Their expressions frozen in terror. For a moment, there was only silence. A stunned, frozen silence in which the weight of betrayal seemed to hang in the air. Then, without a word, I advanced. Rage fueled every movement as I lunged forward, my fist connecting with a sickening thud against flesh. Ainsley cried out, the sound a mix of surprise and agony, as I pinned her to the headboard. I had once known her as the embodiment of grace. Now, she was reduced to a figure of panic and regret. The young woman attempted to flee, but I intercepted her with a swift, calculated blow that left her crumpled on the floor. Amid the chaos, I turned my attention to Sable and Blaze. The cleaning lady, whose soft, beguiling smile had once masked a secret life, now trembled under the realization of her complicity. Blaze, her partner, tried to interject with a stammered plea, but my response was a torrent of physical violence that brooked no negotiation. Each punch was a measured punctuation to the litany of betrayal, each strike an exclamation of retribution. The room became a cacophony of sounds. The dull thud of fists meeting flesh, desperate gasps, and the shattering of glass as a lamp toppled from its perch. In that moment, I was no longer the man who had loved so dearly. I was an instrument of vengeance, a force unbound by remorse. I moved with a brutal efficiency, a symphony of physical retribution composed in the key of betrayal. The blows I delivered were not mindless. They were guided by a cold, calculated precision honed by weeks of planning and sleepless determination. Time seemed to slow as I faced each of the violators of my trust. Ainsley's eyes, once filled with the light of our shared past, now pleaded silently for mercy. A mercy I could no longer afford. The young woman, whose identity was as fleeting as the promises that had been whispered in these very walls, lay sprawled at my feet, a casualty of my irreversible decision. Sable and Blaze, caught in the act of inflicting further betrayal, were subdued with a ferocity that left no doubt. This was not a moment for words, but for physical reckoning. I could feel the adrenaline coursing through my veins, a hot, unrelenting current that drowned out all rational thought. Each strike, each calculated blow, was a reclaiming of the honor that had been so ruthlessly stolen from me. Yet even in the midst of this violent catharsis, a part of me paused to acknowledge the irreversible act I was committing. A line crossed, a point of no return. But there was no time for hesitation. The betrayal demanded retribution, and I was determined that every heart involved would come to feel its searing pain as the tumult subsided. The room fell into an eerie silence, punctuated only by ragged breaths and the distant sound of the storm outside. I stood amidst the wreckage, surrounded by the shattered remnants of a life I had once known. The physical evidence of betrayal lay scattered on the floor, a stark, undeniable record of the price of infidelity. My chest heaved with a mix of exhaustion and grim satisfaction, though even that satisfaction was marred by the hollowness that now consumed me. That I knew, in that final, brutal moment, that nothing could ever restore what had been lost. The physical violence, as indiscriminate and raw as it was, had only deepened the wounds within my soul. But in that moment, there was no turning back. The echoes of my rage would reverberate long after the figures before me had faded into the darkness of the night. Dawn crept over the horizon with a chill that matched the desolation in my heart. The storm outside had abated, leaving the city draped in a heavy silence. A silence that mirrored the quiet devastation left in the wake of the night's violence. In the early light, I wandered through our apartment, each step stirring the remnants of what once had been a home filled with love and hope. Now it was a crime scene, a monument to betrayal and retribution. The physical evidence of my actions was unmistakable. In the dim morning light, I surveyed the scene. Ainsley, battered and trembling on the bed, her eyes swollen with shock and regret. The young woman, crumpled in a corner, her features contorted in pain, and Sable and Blaze, lying together in a tangled heap on the floor, victims of a justice too fierce to be undone. I moved slowly among them, each sight a stark reminder of the irreversible act I had committed. I had taken justice into my own hands, but the cost was immeasurable. For hours, I sat in the silence of our ruined living room, the weight of my actions pressing down on me like the oppressive heat of a forgotten summer. The adrenaline had long since faded, leaving in its wake a raw, aching emptiness that no amount of violence could ever fill. I replayed the night in my mind. The sound of fists meeting flesh, the frantic cries for mercy, the final, resounding thud of retribution. With each recollection, I felt both a grim satisfaction and an ever-growing sorrow. I had exacted my revenge, yet the victory was hollow. In the aftermath, I understood that the physical act of retribution had not restored my honor or healed the gaping wound of betrayal. Instead, it had transformed me into something unrecognizable. A man who now carried the scars of violence both on his body and in the recesses of his soul. The faces of those I had struck would haunt me in quiet moments, and the echoes of that night would follow me into every dark corner of my future. That I began to question the true nature of justice. Had I, in my fervor, become the very monster I sought to vanquish? The reflection in a shattered mirror showed a man whose eyes were haunted by regret. A man who, in his pursuit of physical revenge, had lost the capacity for forgiveness, compassion, or even remorse. The empty apartment was not only a physical space of destruction, but a tomb for the man I had once been. As the day wore on, I made a decision. I could no longer live in the aftermath of my own rage, bound to the memory of a love betrayed and the violence it had engendered. I began to document every detail, the evidence I had gathered over the past weeks, the hidden camera footage that had once spurred my transformation, and the final, brutal moments that had sealed our fate. I knew that these records would be my only testament to the truth, a narrative of betrayal and the consequences of unchecked retribution. Yet, even as I prepared to confront the inevitable repercussions, legal, moral, and emotional, I could not escape the stark realization that revenge, however physically exacted, had not brought me solace. Instead, it had left me isolated, haunted by the echoes of every blow I had struck and every cry of agony that had punctuated the night. The apartment, once filled with the promise of shared dreams, now stood as a mausoleum of lost innocence and shattered trust. Now, as I pen these final words, I stand at the crossroads of my own existence. The faces of those I harmed blur into a distant memory, yet the guilt and sorrow remain vivid as ever. I am left to wonder if forgiveness is even possible, not from those I hurt, nor from the man I have become. The price of betrayal had been steep, and in my quest for justice, I had sacrificed the very essence of my soul. The silence of the aftermath speaks louder than any words ever could, and the truth is clear. In seeking to punish those who betrayed me, I have condemned myself to an eternity of regret that I close this account with no illusions of closure. Only the raw, unvarnished admission that the road to retribution is paved with irreversible choices. Perhaps someday, I may learn to forgive. Not for their sake but to free myself from the endless night of remorse. Until that day comes, I walk forward into the uncertain dawn, forever haunted by the echoes of betrayal and the unyielding price of revenge. And that's the end of today's story. If you enjoyed this journey, please give this video a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more incredible stories like this one. Got thoughts or experiences you'd like to share? Drop them in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. Thanks for watching and I'll see you in the next one. Take care.